QuickApi is a MODX extra that makes it possible to create snippet-based API endpoints as an alternative to the MODX REST API. Currently on MODX 3, the extra can't be downloaded from the package provider, because of a mismatch between the supported versions. So you have to download it manually, and then move the zip file to the core/packages folder. Then search locally for new packages and install the extra. On installation, it creates a sample endpoint. To test it, open a new browser tab and call the URL /API/hello_world. If you are logged in as an administrator, you should get a successful JSON response. Add a greeting parameter to the URL, and the result string in the response changes. If you are not logged into MODX or use a tool like Postman, the same request returns a 403 response code. How does the extra work? In the plugin QuickApi root, on the event on MODX init, the code checks the requested page alias. If the alias starts with API/, then the request gets redirected to the resource with the alias QuickApi process. On installation, a new resource QuickApi processor with this alias was created. The resource has an empty template. The content type is set to the type REST-like, and in the resource content the snippet QuickApi is called uncached. In the snippet QuickApi, two additional snippets get executed. One to check the access permission and one to execute the actual code of the endpoint. The snippet API authorized is the default authorization snippet. In the description field you can see a list of the properties which can be used within the snippet. These are auth token, the host name, the IP address, the request method, the values from the JSON request body as an associative array, the URL path segments as an array, and the GET request parameters. The default authorization snippet compares a potential authorization token with the value from the system setting. Otherwise, the snippet checks if the user is a member of the administrator user group and a pseudo user, or if the user is authenticated in the web context by MODX. Everyone that knows the API key can access your endpoint if you use the default authorization snippet. The snippet API Hello World is the sample endpoint for the URL /API/hello_world. Again, in the description field, you can see a list of the properties that can be used within the snippet. The code reads the value from the greetings request parameter, adds the word world to it and returns that. With the function QuickApi setResponse, you can define if the request was handled successfully, return your endpoint data, a potential message, and set the HTTP response status code. For our own endpoint, we use the same custom class item, as in the last video about the REST API. We also use the same JavaScript code from the last video, that is stored in the items resource. All we have to do in the JavaScript code, is to change the URL of the API from REST to API. When we view the resource, it displays an error message, because the endpoint doesn't exist yet. In the manager we duplicate the snippet API authorized, and give it the name API items authorized. You can create a custom authorization snippet for a specific endpoint by naming it API plus name of the endpoint plus authorized. For example, for our endpoint /API items, we name it API items authorized. You can also create a generic custom authorization snippet for the whole API, by creating a snippet with the name myAPI authorized. The code first checks if a snippet for the specific endpoint exists. If that's not the case, the code looks for a snippet named myAPI authorized. If such a snippet doesn't exist either, the code runs the default snippet API authorized. For now, we just return true for every request, to make testing easier. We will change it later. We then duplicate the snippet API hello world and rename it to API items. This is the snippet for our custom endpoint code, and the name has to be API plus the name of the endpoint. With a use statement we import our custom class. We check the value of the variable method that contains the HTTP request method. If the method is get, we return the data of all our items. For this, we create a new XPDO query. Then define that the items are sorted by the field ID in descending order. With getCollection we query all the items from the database. We then loop through all the items, convert the item objects to arrays and add them to our response array. With QuickApi setResponse, we set the response data. The first parameter true indicates that the request was handled successfully. In the second parameter we return the items data, and the total amount of items. For any other request method, we return a 403 error code. Now on our web page, when we click the reload button, the data is shown. In Postman, when we send a GET request to our endpoint, we can see the structure of the JSON response. The property success has the value from the first parameter of the setResponse method. The value of the message property is from the third parameter we didn't set. The remaining properties are the data from the second parameter. When we try to delete an item on the web page, it shows an error, because this request method is not yet allowed. Let's change that. In the code we add an else if statement to handle delete requests. First we check if an ID was supplied in the request URL, by checking the first value of the path array. If there is no ID, or the ID is not a number, we return a ID not specified error message. Otherwise we query the item with the provided ID from the database. If such an item exists, we delete it, and set success to true in the response. If there is no corresponding item in the database, we return a item not found error message. When we test it in Postman, we can see the ID not specified error message when we don't supply an ID. Adding a non-existent ID to the URL returns the item not found error message. Changing that to an existing ID makes the request successful. When we test it on the web page, we can see that deleting items now works. Let's add some code to enable the creation of new items. We add an else if block for the method post. First we check if fields for the name and the description exist in the request body. If one or both of these fields are missing, we return a missing data error message. If the data is available, we create a new object of our item class, and set the field's name and description. Then we save the item to the database and return an affirmative response. We also add the saved item to the response in the field object. Testing the changes in the application Postman, we can see the missing data message if we don't add data to the request. After adding the JSON data to the body, the request is successful, and the response contains the data of the saved item. Adding a new item on the web page now works as well. We are still missing the functionality to edit items. Therefore we add another else if block to the code for the method put. We first check if an ID field was supplied in the request body with a valid ID. If that's the case, we query the item with this ID from the database. If such an item exists, we update the fields with the data from the request body and save the changes. If no corresponding item exists, we return a item not found error message. In Postman, if we make a put request without specifying the ID, the request returns an error message. When we add an ID property to the JSON data, however, the request is successful, and the changes are visible in the response. Editing an item on the web page now works as well. The last thing to do is to adjust our authorization snippet to protect the endpoint. In the snippet API items authorized, we set the initial value of the variable auth to false. We check the request method, and if the method is get, we set auth to true, so that everybody can read the data. For all other request methods, we verify that the user is authenticated in the web context, and that they are a member of the user group API user. To test these changes, we open a new private browser window and load the items page. Without being logged in, we can read the data, but we can't delete items. Adding or editing items is also not possible. After logging in, however, we have the permission to delete items, to add new ones and to edit existing ones.